Right, rook plus two connected passed pawns versus a rook. I've called this video the Kasparian position, which we'll get onto. But it's really just about rook plus two connected passed pawns versus a rook. The first thing to say is if you've got two connected passed pawns and a rook versus a rook, it's almost certainly going to be a win for the attacking side. The only way it's not going to be a win is if the attacking side has lots of disadvantages. So the first disadvantage that we've got here with these two connected pawns is that they are a knight and a rook's pawn. That makes things a bit more difficult for the attacking side. The second disadvantage that we've got is that the attacking side's king is miles away. Okay, so you have to have disadvantages like that in the position before it's even worth studying, because otherwise it's just going to be a trivial win for the attacking side. Even in this position where the attacking side has all those disadvantages, because the defending side's king is not in a particularly clever place either, this is a very easy win for white, and they just go on what Dvoretsky calls autopilot. The g4 pawn is attacked right now, so we'll defend it. I appreciate it's attacked twice and now defended only once, but black can't swap the rooks because the h pawn was simply queen. So what does black do? I mean, there's nothing that black can do. You know, they move their king around, move their rook around. They could deliver some checks to our king, but it doesn't really get anywhere particularly. And white's moves they're just so easy. You know, rook g6, push the h pawn, push the g pawn, put the rook on g7, and we've got exactly the same configuration of pawns and rook as a minute ago, but we're one rank further up. If we keep doing that, then we're going to get a queen very, very soon. So the only thing black could really try is, well, I can see that I'm not going to be able to stop these two pawns, so I know I'll come and do some checkmate threats, and maybe that will get me some salvation. Not really, because the white rook is in the open and can just destroy those checkmate threats in just one move. This is a very, very easy win for white. So yeah, even in these circumstances, we've got the disadvantage of it being a knight and a rook's pawn, the disadvantage of our king being miles away, but it's still a massive win. And then you can say, yeah, but that's only because the defending side's king is in a silly position. What about if the defending side's king was in a really good position like this? What about that? Is that still just a win for white, and there's nothing black can do? So I know I've called this video the Kasparian position, but this position is actually called, well, it's not called anything, but it's accredited to first having been studied by Kling and Horwitz back in 1851. And it's a draw. I'd say it's a reasonably well-known blockade of your knights and your rook pawn, your knight and your rook's pawn over here with the king. There's just no way that white can make progress. The rook's defending checks here. The only sensible thing white could try and do is to try and make progress, or think to do, is to bring their rook round the back. Something that's worth noting is that if it wasn't a knight and a rook's pawn, you shift the king, you bring the rook here, you check, swap the rooks, black king ends up on f6, and then we play king h5, and after the black king moves, we play king to i6, which obviously the chessboard's not letting me do an arrow to i6 because the i6 square doesn't exist. If that h6 pawn wasn't an h pawn, it was some other pawn, then the whatever letter of the alphabet it is plus 1, 6 would exist, and that would be a win. So it just shows you that, you know, to create a position that's even worth studying, because, you know, Dvoretsky's not going to put stuff in his endgame manual. It's just like, oh, here's a position, it's just won really easily. What's the point of that? To make it worth studying two connected pawns in rook plus two pawns versus rook, you have to work very hard to find an example like this where, for various reasons, it is a draw. You should know, I think we should all just know, well, certainly I've decided I think I ought to know how this is drawn, particularly when white tries something a bit more inventive than just swapping the rooks and then going, oh, I've only got a rook's pawn. Rook down the back, rook d8, rook b4 check, king comes forward, king e5. Now this is where black has to be careful, because black can make mistakes here. One of the mistakes is pretty obvious. Okay, if you thought king takes g5 was a good move, I'd say you've got bigger problems than trying to understand the Kasparian position. Okay, so that's a fairly obvious bad move. But what if black says, okay, yeah, I need my king defending the h7 square, so I'll bring my rook over because that g-pawn's a goner. This is also a losing move, rook g4. We'll see rook g8 check, king h7, rook g7 check, king h8. Now white has to be a little bit careful. Black's king is stalemated, so that this is a desperado rook, and it will go on a desperado mission, being careful not to do any desperado stuff that allows the white rook to take it, or just go and check, you know, the white king in places like this where the stalemate would then remain, and that would just be a draw. So white has to be a bit careful here. In fact, white has only one move to avoid those troubles, because the g-pawn's being attacked, but you've also got to unstalemate the black king. It's like, I've got to defend my g-pawn and move my rook. It's like, well, okay, the next move is pretty obvious, rook g6. King h7, it's like, how's that helped? I'm just going to go around in circles. No, because the white king comes into f5, and it's at this point that black should maybe realise they never should have played rook g4. You can see that position is completely gone. Maybe a couple of checks, stick the king on f7. This pawn's coming forward. I mean, this rook's either coming forward to deliver checkmate or a swap of the rooks. It's an easy win from that point forward. So back here, black can't play rook g4, and they can't play king takes g5. They could check the king again, actually, but it's probably just going to delay the move that needs playing, which is rook b7. What does white now do to make progress? I mean, when you see rook b7, it's like, well, what are you going to do there? It's like, well, I'll play rook g8 check. All right, king h7. Now what are you going to do? Oh, yeah, not sure. I have to move my rook somewhere. Well, I'll bring it out again. Okay. At this point, by the way, black could actually force the matter with quite a clever little move. Rook b5 check. That's not particularly clever. King f4, but rook takes g5. Bosh. That is a clever move. Stalemate themes in again. That rook can't be taken. You've got to be very careful with stuff like that. Whenever you play a move like that, you've got to really check for checks, basically. And you're in stalemate, so that rook can't be taken. But you've got to be really careful the other side can't chuck in a check that unstalemates your king and then take that rook next move. And here you would have to take the h-pawn. And then, you know, this king's attached to this rook. Maybe another check would pick up that rook. But you've got a couple of moves here. You've got king h5. You've also got rook g6. So it is a stalemate shot. Rook b5 check, and then rook takes g5 does force the issue. However, we don't even need that, because we could just go back to the original position. We can just sort of king back to g6, because as a quick reminder, that came from here, didn't it? Check, king h7, rook out. All right, I'll put my king back on g6. What else have you got? And the answer is nothing. White's got nothing here. Comes back and defends the g-pawn. Check, blocks, rook back to b6. We're back where we started. So that's a draw, that position. Before we move on, finally, to the Kasparian position, it's worth noting that if you move everything on the board from that original position down by one, in fact, I think from the final position down, yeah, so I've taken the final position, which is pretty much where we started, and moved that down by one. What about now? Because white's got a bit more space behind up here, you know, could they do anything with that? Not really, and in fact the draw's even easier this time for the defending side. If white tries to make progress by going around from behind, we deliver a check, and as soon as the king moves off the pawn, we just take it. This time h6, king comes back, it's not h7 equals queen, because we moved everything down. You can allow this time. Rook back to b8, draw. So yeah, if you're the attacking side, be very careful that you don't let black set up this defence. It is a draw. It's even a draw one rank further back up. This has been known since at least 1851 that this position is a draw. So yeah, don't let the defending side get this set up. And if you're the defending side, obviously try and get this set up. I'm pretty sure I've had this in Blitz both ways round online. I've probably then messed it up both ways as well anyway, but I can definitely remember stuff like this where it's just, how have I managed to not win this one? Right, let's finally get on to the Kasparian position. We're sticking with knight and rook's pawn, and we excuse me, we can see that we've got our attacking king miles out the way, so obviously a big disadvantage there. And the defending side's king is nicely in front of the 2 pawns. It's white to play. Now, this is hard, this particular Kasparian study. It's from 1946. Some guy called Kasparian decided to study this position. And the analysis is about to get pretty deep. The first thing is, though, is we need to accept as a fact that if the white rook can extract itself and get to the 5th rank, so it defends this h-pawn laterally, white's won. Okay, to stand any chance of progressing with understanding this position, this Kasparian position, you have to let that be a fact. Just don't fight it for now. We'll change the rules of chess from we need to checkmate the king to we need to get our rook out and onto the 5th rank. That's the aim of this game, first of all. And already, if you wanted to, you could pause the video and work out how you're going to do that. A couple of things to say on it. For anyone who's not paused the video straight away, you can pause the video at any time and think, oh, okay, you've given me enough information now, I'll go and have a go at it. Is that, given that that's a fact, the black king never wants to come to f8, because that makes the extraction job easy. So the black king is tied down to the g8 square. The white rook is tied down to the h7 square. Okay. Rook b7, we'd see rook g5, sort of forking these 2 pawns. The only way you can defend that h-pawn and not give up your g-pawn is to come back. You've actually thrown away the win here, by the way, with that original rook b7, because at the very least, black could play rook g3 and go back to the starting position. But in fact here, black should play rook g2, and it's already a draw. A bit of a clue, I suspect, as to what you should do on your first move, although that clue might be a bit misleading, thinking about it. So what does white do? They can't get their rook out. They need to get their rook out and down to the 5th rank. It's got to be a king move. Let's go through. I mean, again, pause the video if you want to and try and work out what you're going to do with your king. There's only one winning move here. It's astonishing that there is only one winning move, but there is. Let's just look at some natural moves with the white king and see why they're wrong. And then that'll lead us to the right one. So who on earth in a million years, even if they had 20 minutes on their clock or so half an hour on their clock to try and study this over the board, who in a million years, unless they knew about the Kasparian position, wouldn't play king b2? Seriously, find the strongest chess player you know, show them this, say, oh, what should white do now? Okay, unless they know about the Kasparian position, they're going to play king b2. Who wouldn't play king b2? It throws away the win. But why? Well, the black rook has to stay at least on the g file, so that if white tries to extract their rook, we've seen already, rook g5 forks these 2 pawns and forces the white rook back to h7. But another square that the black rook can use is h3. So the black rook's just going to do this, because all the time the black rook's on h3 or g3, the white rook can't extract itself. So the only way for white to make progress is to come over and attack. So the computer did something funny there. It's come over and try and hassle this rook. But this is what black wanted. Okay, black wanted the white king to attack the rook when it was on g3, so that it then has to come again and attack the rook when it's on h3. And that's moved the white king onto the g file, which is absolutely crucial. The reason that's crucial is that the black rook just moves somewhere over here, and then when white tries to extract their rook, we'll see rook c5, and this pawn can't be pushed because this check will pick up the g pawn. So back in this original position, if you think about it from black's perspective, they're going to be shuffling their rook back and forth between the g3 and the h3 squares, and they want the white king to attack them on f2. Okay, they want their white king to go to a dark square. They want the white king to go king b2. Okay. So in fact, the winning move is king a2. And now, if black does the rook shuffle, by the time the white king gets over, it doesn't attack the rook, but it does defend the g3 square. And now the black rook can't leave, it can't come to the g file. It has to leave, well, it doesn't have to leave the h file, but if it leaves the h file, it's got to go over here somewhere, and then the white rook can be extracted because this doesn't arrive, that threat doesn't arrive with the pin idea. So white could just push the h pawn. Black might try to be obstinate and play, I don't know, rook h4, but now the king's in, king g3, rook off to the side. Again, you can't extract the rook, well you can extract the rook, but not with the aim of pushing the pawn, because then it's rook g5 check again, but your king's in now. And we can see that's a very easy win for white from there. The king's made contact with the pawns. Black's in big trouble there. Now when I first saw this, I thought, yeah, it's all very clever, but like there's two files down here, 2 ranks, sorry. Why can't white just sort of triangulate and lose a move? Why does it have to be king a2 now? I mean, why can't you just play king b1, for example? But now black's got a very clever little maneuver. If you don't come up to the second rank, the black rook checks you, and it will just keep checking you on the first rank. As soon as you move up to attack the rook, it will go to the g3 or the h3 square, depending on which one it needs to go to. So let's just see an example of that actually. So here, if it was king d2, I'm not going to cheat and look at the engine. I'm going to move to a white square. I want to move to a white square because white's next move is king e2. That's to a white square. Okay, so I'm going to play a move, and then white will play king e2. That's a king to a white square. So if my rook's on h3, I'll be all right. And I'll just do the shuffle, and there you go. I got it right. Let's go back to that then. So white might just think, okay, yeah, but I'm not going to fall into that trap. I'm just going to come all the way over here. And it's like, where does it go? If it goes to g1, it's already on the g file, and we can just, yeah, just keep checking basically. There's just nothing that white can do. Yeah. And if king to f2, we've got the desired king back to g2 again. So yeah, absolutely astonishing. All of this, by the way, is accepting as a fact that the white rook needs to get extracted to come down and be on the 5th rank to defend the h-pawn. And that means that white's only winning move in the original position is king a2. Okay. So at this point, black might say, okay, I can see that I'm not going to be able to stop you stopping me doing this h3, g3 defensive plan. Yeah, I can see eventually we're going to arrive where my rook's on h3, you play king f2, and I have to leave the h file. So given that, I'm going to do something more sensible now. I'm just going to accept that my rook's got to leave the g3 and the h3 squares. So rook d3, whilst the white king's still miles away on a2. Rook b7, and now black's got a choice, sort of temporarily put their rook back behind one of the g-pawns or the h-pawn. I mean, otherwise the threat is h6, so black's got to do something about that. Rook h3 is probably the better move. I mean, if rook g3, then no pawn's being directly attacked at the moment. So rook b3, rook g5, rook h3, king g7, and we can just push the h-pawn. What does black do here? If king h8, g7 check, and that's clearly gone. If king g8, we can still play g7. King h7, bring the king in. It's just utterly hopeless for black, those positions. So black's better off putting their rook on h3, and then we've got the lateral defense. So that's mission accomplished. And it's quite amusing because we're about to see a world of variations now. And there's no way you could be able to memorize all of them. I'm sure I'm going to mess some of them up in my explanation, even though I'm not going to do them again, just because there's just so many of them. But the Dvoretsky kind of just goes, well, as long as you know that the trick of how you get your rook extracted to the 5th rank, and you just need to know that that's enough for a win, then you'll be fine. Which is sort of quite amusing. Anyway, king g7. A really good move to play here is rook g5, where you've got your rook behind this pawn, which could get pushed to victory if necessary, and you're still defending the h-pawn. The reason this is such a good move, this rook g5, is it really limits what black can do. Now, probably the best move for black here is rook h4, but look at some of the other options. Black might think to bring their king into h6. That's been lost straight away. Well, I think you're going to be defending queen versus rook there as black there. That might not be a bad option, to be honest. What else have we got? We've got rook c3, rook off this way. Then you can play h6 check, king takes h6, g7. And again, that's going to be queen versus rook. Or if king back to g8, then we're going to have to bring our king over. King b2, rook e3, king c2, rook a3. Just keep bringing the king over. Black's refusing to let you cross the 3rd rank. But, I mean, once your king's over, you can see that, yeah, I mean, there's what you're trying to do, by the way, by bringing your king over is get this h-pawn. So now black's either got to let your king forward, or if they insist on not letting your king forward, you can play this h6 move next go without fear of rook h3, because you're defending the h3 square. So rook g5, really good move. And black's best try is probably just to stay on that h-pawn. Okay. And one thing that's good about that try is that if white brings their king over here, there's no way that the king by itself can stop this back and forth plan staying on the h-pawn. So it's pointless, white bringing their king over there. Instead, they've got to bring their king up the board. Okay. Then black can start checking that king from behind. And it finally rests on the d6 square before the white rook can pop across and block those checks. It's nowhere near over. Rook a1, king e7. A couple of options talked about in the book here for black. Rook a6 is like the main line, but there's a world of variations after rook e1 check. We would see king d8 apparently. And now some example variations. If king g8, h6. This is looking pretty bad. What could black try here? We've got rook e6, h7 check, king h8, rook g5, king g7, rook h5. That's gone. Even if the king goes back to h8, g7 check's going to win that. Or if rook h1, we can see king e7, rook takes h6, king f6. Or in that position, if we saw rook g1, rook d6. So that was all resulting from, after that position, we saw king g8 and then h6. So not king g8 for black. What about rook a1 here? Well, here you go, rook d7 check, king g8, king e7. That's pretty much transposing to where we're about to see in a sec. And finally, if king tries going out to h6, rook d7, king takes h5, g7, rook g1, king e8, king h6, king f8. And we can see that that's gone as well. So I think that's everything. Like I said, it's just a world of variations. That was if black tried rook e1 check. So even in the rook e1 check line, there was all sorts of variations there. Rook a6, I guess, is considered the main line here, I suppose. White still plays rook d7. If black plays rook a5, just to attack the h-pawn, we could see king e6 check, king g8, h6, rook a8, and then something like rook d6. And yeah, that's, you can see black's in big trouble there. Or if rook c6, king d8 check, king g8, rook e7, king f8, king d7, rook back off to a6, rook to e6, rook a7 check, king d6, rook a6 check, king e5, rook a5 check, king f6. And that's gone as well. Obviously the h-pawn can't be taken there because of g7 check. So rook b6 instead, and we still see king d8 check, king g8, king c7, rook to a6, and then rook to d6. I mean, what white's trying to achieve in all of these positions is a way of setting up the h6, g6 pawn. What's the word? Pawns. Can't think of the word. So that we've got checkmate threats or rook swap threats, and I mean, that was an impossible number of variations to sort of keep track of. So you know, absolutely no chance that you'll be able to do that. But I think it's fair game to ask that we understand that you've got to get your rook to the 5th rank. So there's like an odd even thing going on where you have to be careful and play king a2. And you will eventually get that rook out. And then once your rook's to the 5th rank, rook g5 is a very good move. And then you just got to bring your king forward and do a lot of messing about from there. I mean, I went through all the variations as they're in the textbook. I guess just play around with it yourselves as well. You might have been looking at some of those. Oh, why don't you play? What if black had played rook a6 in that position or whatever? I don't know. There was too much going on to sort of see every single line, but I think it's enough to understand the ideas, get your king forward, and yeah, just sort of try and make progress from there. So that's the Kasparian position, which he came up with in, well, he studied all this stuff in 1946. And probably the main thing you might have been thinking in all of this is, well, yeah, that's a very interesting study, but, you know, I know King A2, brilliant, but you're not going to get this stuff in a game. Well, how about this? This is a game from 1999. It is black to play. Their h-pawn is under attack. What are they going to do? Pause the video and decide what you would play here next as black. So in the game, black played rook c1 check, and that throws away the win immediately. Okay. White played king g2. We saw rook c2 check. King back to g1. The h-pawn still attacked. Rook h2. And then white recognised that they're in the Kasparian position. Or whether they recognised it or not, they played the move that's consistent with them having recognised it. They played rook b6. They just played their rook to a dark square. And this is exactly a mirror image of the study from 1946, except black's already played this dodgy king g7. So I mean, now we just see the black king come over, king f7, white went rook h6, and king e7, rook g6, and we've got it to the point where the black king's desperately trying not to play this king f7 move, which attacks the white rook when it's on a light square, by doing this. But this is the point where white can just deliver the checks. King e8, rook e6, king d7. So have a pause of the video again here if you like, and decide which of these two squares does white want to put their rook on, G6 or H6. And you should be thinking, hang on a minute, when I play my next move, I want, like when my rook's on, I wanted to attack my rook basically. So given that black's next move is going to be king e7, you want to play your rook to h6. In the game, h3 was actually played, rook g6, and then they agreed a draw. So in the original position, if you had knowledge of that Kasparian position, you wouldn't play rook c1 check and come around and defend the h-pawn that way. Sorry, I think a minute ago I got mixed up with the sides of the board. This is the side of the board where this would have been the mirror image. Sorry, I got that wrong. That would have been the mirror image wrong move, wouldn't it? But the point is that we're already, after black's next move, if they want to extract their king from being on the g file or the h file, but also get white's rook off of that situation, they can only play king f7, and that's when we can come to h6. The point is that, yeah, that's then the mirror image, because that would be the equivalent of the rook being on h3 and the king being on h3 and the rook being on f2 in that previous position. Anyway, back to the original position. Black can't do that, but their h-pawn's being attacked. So what should they do? Well, push it. You think, well, that's no good, because rook g4 check picks up the g-pawn, but you've got rook g6. Okay, and after rook h4, you can push the h-pawn, king g2, rook h6, rook g4 check, king f6. White's got to do something about this h1 equals queen threat on the horizon. Rook f4, king g5, rook back to f1, king g4. We've made contact with the pawns. I mean, the white rook's got control of the first rank, but now we can just transpose into a winning king and pawn ending. And that's a win for black. Next, this is a game from 1970. Pause the video and decide what would you do here as white. It is white to play. So this one's not necessarily the Kasparian position per se, but it's you know, we've got the same sort of thing with the connected knights and rook's pawn going on. Lots of different things you might have tried here as white, and the fact that it's happened in a game, one of the variations you're about to see is just absolutely astonishing. So you might have thought to play king d2. Black can play rook f2 check, king c1, a2. That's pretty bad. So not that. King d3 to avoid that check, but black will play rook f2 anyway. King c4, rook b2, and now those pawns are on autopilot. So I said not necessarily the Kasparian position, but you know, coming back to that autopilot position we looked at a while back. You might think, well, I'll just wait to see what black does next and just sort of push the e pawn. e4, black can come behind the b pawn. King d2, b3, king c1, b3 check, king b1, rook b3, and black's just going to sort of bring their king over to deal with this pawn. Yeah, you can see that's just completely gone for white. And then this is one of my favourites. Rook b6 looks like a perfectly sensible move, and this could easily be a black to play and deliver a sort of a thunderbolt puzzle in itself. Okay, so very well done. If you say, oh no, I can't play rook b6 because you know we've got the two connected passed pawns. I guess the thought process would go along the lines of, well, I want to play rook b6, but we know that in this position, you know, black can just push the a pawn, and you know the rook can't deal with those two connected passed pawns just on rook versus pawns. So but look, rook takes b4 is check. So rook takes b4 check, king moves, and then you play rook a4. White might even be, well, not quite. I was about to say white might even be winning that, but not really. That's the cast iron draw, isn't it? As long as the black king's gone that way. But then this a2, black's then thinking, hang on, this a2 only doesn't work because of that check. Oh, that's so annoying. If only there was something blocking that check. Wow. Rook f4. You'd be pretty upset to see that hit the board, wouldn't you? It's one of those moves where you, oh god, I'm going to end up in a puzzle book now as the accomplice. A2, yeah, king f3. Oh yeah, this king f3. White's not finished, setting up a checkmate threat, but black just gets out of it. Rook a6, b3, and it's gone. So not rook b6. You know, you idiots. Did you not see rook f4? Honestly, what's wrong with you? So what you need to do is play rook a4. Rook b7, then the king comes across. King c2, b pawn gets pushed with check, king b1, a pawn gets pushed with check, king b2. And yeah, I mean, white doesn't need to even worry about this pawn now. There's just absolutely no way for black to make any progress in that position. So yeah, well done if in that original position you found rook a4. I found rook a4. It seemed like a very sensible move. It seemed like the most sensible move. It just immediately stops the progress of those two pawns and allows our king to come across. I can't... Do you know what? I think I rejected rook b6 but on account of a2, not even seeing that that fell with check. I can tell you for certain that I never found rook f4. No chance. So that's pretty bad though, isn't it? That's I wasn't concentrating very hard, was I, if I didn't see that. Oh look, there's a king over there. That was check. And last but not least, and one of the lines in this just makes me laugh quite a lot, to be honest. It's just absolutely hilarious. So this is a study by Kasparian again, 2 years after that mentor 1946 one, that you might think, oh, that's just a study, but then it was relevant in that 1999 game. So you could definitely argue that it's worth knowing that study. But this position's very amusing, and yet all the stuff we're about to see is all useful things that could happen in games, which I'll justify as we go along. So here's black to play. Pause the video and decide what would you do here as black. So the really amusing one, the one that makes me chuckle, is you think, well, okay, we've got to try and defend against these pawns. So you bring the king back, and it's just like, well, that's a silly move. You know, what are you doing? H4, king f6, h5, king g7, rook h7 check, king g8, and then of course that's now lost. Don't you remember the original study from 1946 where white plays king a2? So it just amuses me that, you know, I introduced the Kasparian position, which was this position, and we sort of, well, I don't know if you agree with me because I don't even know who's watching this, but I presume that most people are agreeing with me that no one's going to find king a2 until they understand what's wrong with king b2, with the odd even thing with the king going to attack the rook. It's like this position's impossible in itself, and that's just accepting as a fact that we need to extract this rook and bring it to the 5th rank. So even if you're given that as a fact, it's still very hard to find king a2, and even more ridiculous that you're like, oh no, I can't play king e6 because that's going to lead to this position where white's won because he plays king a2. I mean, you might as well just give the starting position of a game of chess and say, well, what do you want to do here? So it starts to get a bit ridiculous, to be honest. Anyway, so given that we know that 1946 study inside out, we can't play king e6 in this position. So what does black try? Well, if we can't bring the king back to defend against these pawns, we really are a bit stuffed on that front, to be honest, and we've got to try something else. Now, if you remember back to that position from one of the earlier positions, I sort of said, well, black's realising they're not going to stop these pawns. They think, oh no, I'll go and do some checkmate threats, see if that helps me. And it was completely useless because the white rook was in the open and delivered checks to just blow those checkmate threats out of the water. Well, this time round, we are guarding a g-pawns push. So this rook can't get out until that g-pawn is defended. So you've got the time it takes white to defend that g-pawn to set up some checkmate threats to get yourself out of this pickle. Yeah, so if you worked out that checkmate threats was the way to save yourself in this position, well done. If you decided rook g2 was the correct first move and the way to go about it, bad luck, it's not. h4, we might see black come in with king c4, but the white king can start moving. King b1. If king b3, the white king can start coming across. King c1, the black king follows it, but we get all the way over here. Black can deliver this check, rook f2. I mean, you can see there's not really much point in king f3. Black plays this check, king g1, king to f3 maybe. The white pawn's defended. Rook g2 check, king to h1. What does black even try here? Rook g4, rook h8, rook h4 check, king g1, and yeah, I mean it's the white rook's out now. So even if black did the usual rook g4 check and then king f1 and rook back to h4, we've got that check there. So the correct first move to get out of this mess and start threatening those checkmate threats to get yourself salvation was king c4. What could white try here? Well, if they carry on pushing the h-pawn, they're actually getting mated. Okay, that's going to lose the game for white. So that's going to there is no defense against rook g1 checkmate. If they play king b1, then the black king can come into b3. Okay. Slightly different this time round. We'll see this king chase all the way over here. Black comes all the way to f3 and white can then push the h-pawn. But we've got rook g4, h5, rook a4. Okay. Rook h4 would have done it as well. But the point is, I mean, there's no point in the white king going this way. And when it comes back, as soon as it hits the b1 square, we can do the sort of checking it round the corner business. So yeah, that would be a draw that way. What else? Let's go back to the original position. So again, king c4. We've looked at king b2. We looked at king b2. Don't we have looked at king b2? Sorry, we've looked at h4 and we looked at king b1. Yeah, if king b2, then you can play check, rook g2 check, king to a3. I mean, I suppose the white king could try and come this way, but we're going to see a similar sort of thing. Rook h2, king g1, check, king h1. Oh, this is a nice little finish. King f2. And we're going to get a perpetual on these squares. Well, one quite amusing line here is white plays h4, h5, and has lost the game. Unavoidable checkmate in one. So not king c1, back in this position. King a3, rook g3 check, king to a4, rook down to g1. If white plays rook h4 check, we can then come back just in time to collect the g-pawn. So instead of rook h4 check, just keep going with the king. King c5, king a6, king c6. I wondered about g7 check there, but now again we can just come across king d5. There's just not really a sensible way for white to save this pawn, so that's not a good idea. And if the king keeps going, we keep going as well. What's white got? We've got either king a6, king c6 back where we started, or if rook h7 check, king d6, rook to b7, king e6, the black king is going to get across. So that was a pretty hard study, I thought, and the most amusing bit was, of course, the oh well, you can't play king e6 because you'll see this, and now white's obviously going to play king a2 as the winning move. But yes, the correct first move was king c4. You're coming in to do some checkmating threats, but a lot of variations after that. So I thought there was some pretty bonkers stuff in all of those variations as well. Anyway, that's basically rook plus 2 connected pawns against rook. Done. Apologies for the little mix-up. Was it this position? It was this position, yeah. So apologies that I got my sides of the board mixed up and said that it was coming from this side. But hopefully I said something useful in the end, and we got there with all of that. Hope everyone liked that.